We're picking up on Chapter 2 of the Oversoul 7 Trilogy by Jane Roberts. The first book is The Education of Oversoul 7, and that's what we're on right now. Chapter 2, Part 1 of the Examination, a quick peek at Lydia, Proteus, Ma'a, and Joseph. The present, more or less. Lydia felt nervous, as if someone was watching her beside Lawrence. It was a thunderstormy morning, 11 o'clock, with great dashes of rain pounding against the windows. She was 73 and angrier than usual about it on dark days. Lawrence sat on the blue couch. Well, what do you say? I do wish you'd quit prowling around and give me some kind of answer, he said. She frowned and put down her rye and ginger. My kids won't like it much, not that it makes any difference. God, they're hitting 50, and Anna in particular is pretty pompous. But I just might do it, Larry, the aged Proteus. The aged poetess on her last binge. I like college-age people, too. They haven't got into the establishment yet, and we're out of it. Thank heaven. My kids would okay the idea of a tour, of course, but you and me traveling around the country together in a trailer, unmarried, well, you know how conventional they are, but they can hardly call you a dirty old man since I'm older than you are. So to hell with it, I'll go. He was so excited that he almost dropped his pipe. We'll fill the camper with books and food and liquor. And two of my cats, Tucky and Greenacre, have to go, and Mr. George, my goldfish, he groaned. The two cats and Mr. George? She wanted to cry, but she wouldn't. Defiance rose up so that she thrust her head backward in an old gesture that had been startlingly dramatic when she was young. I'll make out papers before we leave, giving the house to my children. I don't imagine, really, that we'll be coming back. We will, goddammit, we will. He stood up, but knowing how she was, he didn't put his arms around her. He only said again, we'll both come back. Oh, to hell with it. If you say we will, we will. After all, what a difference does it make? Forget it. You know I meant to tell you, not to change the subject, that those dreams of mine are getting nuttier all the time. Last night one of them made sense, yet right now talking to you it almost seems as if they did, if only I could remember them, Lawrence said. When you talk like that, then I'm sure that we've known each other before. Before we met, I mean. You are, after all, what? 15 years older than I am? But in some odd manner, it always seems to me that you're younger. My dear love, she said flippantly. In the world's eyes, we make one hell of a funny pair. The thing is, no one ever thinks they'll really grow old. It always comes as a surprise, and the world sort of hates you for it. Growing old, gracefully or not, just isn't the polite or tasteful thing to do, and you can't blame the young either, because when we were young we felt the same way. Too bad, because in one way I feel freer than I ever did before. You look 10 years younger than you are, he said. Don't be trite. Telling a woman that she looks 63 instead of 73 isn't exactly likely to win her favor. You'd be smarter to say nothing. For some reason that I've never understood, growing old is considered bad enough for a man, but an unforgivable crime for a woman. But best I don't get on that subject. She took another sip of her drink. It's true, I suppose. In good light, and if I bothered to wear makeup, I could look near your age, maybe. But as it is, I look like a scrawny boy grown suddenly old, with white hair and a gaunt face, and quite incredulous about how it all happened. As I am, of course, yet what I am, I am. I can't see dyeing my hair, for example, in a way. It's pretty damn lucky to be 73 years old and get white to begin with. He was silent. Then he said, "If the doctors are right and my heart does go suddenly, then I'll follow our plan," she said. "For that matter, I don't know how long I'll hold out. I'm quite aware that the first stages of my condition have already come upon me. My memory should be all right, generally, for a while though, but you can never tell. If not, then you follow our plan. When I can't recite my own poetry right, then I suppose I'll know that something's wrong." And suddenly it seemed really funny, beautifully hilarious to each of them, he said. "Well, we'll beat their hospitals, their rest homes, and final asylums." Exuberance flashed through his thin, nervous frame. She laughed with him, then stopped. "My electric pencil sharpener," she said, "I just remembered. I dreamed of my old 8th grade classroom. Only my electric pencil sharpener was in it, which is ridiculous, of course. They didn't have them. Now I wonder what that means. A bleed through from one dream to another? A bleed through from one dream state to another?" Oversoul 7 said to Cypress. "They were suspended in 2 green leaves that rustled in the wind outside the windows. You heard what she said about the pencil sharpener? That was the error you missed," Cypress said, and 7 grinned. "Wait," Lydia said. "I was a man in the dream, fairly young. Funny how some of it comes back." Lawrence frowned suddenly. "Never question the dream messages of the gods," he said dramatically. "You might find out what they mean." "Now don't say things like that," she cried. "It makes me nervous. And look at all those leaves outside. How alive they seem. Watchful. God, I wished the damned storm would stop. The sound of rain on a trailer roof would be different," Lawrence said. She smiled over at him. He'd just closed his leather shop for good. He'd upholstered the whole camp trailer, and half of her books had leather covers that he'd made for her. She almost gasped. How could they be so in love and so old? "In my dreams, someone was taking an examination," she said. "I was thinking of my books and just remembered. I was, dear Lydia. We both are." Oversoul 7 was all ready to transmit the words to Lydia when Cypress said gently, "No prompting, remember. The leaves were really tossing in all the wind." Oversoul 7 filled himself with the uniqueness of it, because Cypress was saying, "All right, we have to leave now. The first part of the examination allows for a quick viewing only." And the scene changed. 23rd century AD. Proteus secretly yearned to be a girl. Then they were so much freer to express themselves. Instead, he was stuck at home in a living nodule in his father. He was living. Instead, he was stuck at home in a living nodule with his father. And only innocuous hobbies to content him. He also yearned for the sight of something naturally green, growing real. In fact, this desire had grown so strong that he determined to do something about it. He said eagerly, "Surely we could take some small space and devote it to a natural miniature farm. Say the whole thing only took up one living nodule. It would be self-sufficient. Someone ought to be able to give us permission." "Matthias," his father frowned, "life grows. That kind of life grows. Anyhow, there's no stopping it. It's wild. We've spent 2 centuries developing an artificial environment that we could handle. If you gave that kind of life freedom, People would have children all the time. You'd be dead at 60 or 70. Our way of life is balanced. But I can't expect you to really understand that at 16. He paused with a silent grunt. When we had our natural environment, the woman kept busy having children. Men had the positions of power. Otherwise, I can't think of anything good about those days. They were filled with sickness, wars, social diseases. You're right, as usual, Proteus said. But he was still sick of being cooped up inside with his father all day. Matthias was watching his son's face. Now don't start brooding, he said. We're due for a rain at noon. Why don't you go outside and watch it? It always lifts your spirits. I might, Proteus said. He was shy, diffident, but strangely arrogant too. The suggestion sounded too much like an order, so he just stood there. It's almost noon now, Matthias said irritably. So Proteus scowled and went through the door of their spacious nodule. He stood on the small plastic sidewalk and looked up at the plastic trees. Down there, beneath him, where the real Earth was, who knew what was going on? Really? No one? He thought, except for the scientific expeditions. No one went there anymore. But then he stopped thinking as the rain began. Usually it excited him. Now he felt more depressed. It would rain politely for 15 minutes. The water would run down the plastic drains and be saved and purified, and then fall tomorrow for 15 minutes someplace else. When he was small, he had a schedule of all the rainfalls. He knew exactly where and when it would rain. His own nodule area held 15 subsidies with over 1 million people. He'd run over the plastic sidewalk, frantic with excitement, keeping up with the rain. He squinted up. 3 clouds passed. They always did at rain time. If you didn't know that the artificial sky stopped 1/8 a mile up, or if you tried to forget it like he used to, then you could imagine that the rain was real and the clouds. They were real enough, he thought. Only they were man-made and regulated, he scowled, then grinned. Imagine seeing 4 clouds one day, or even 2, how that would shake everyone up. But the rain fell from the sky of the floating city, and there would never be one cloud more or less. He almost wanted to cry, but he didn't, remembering his age. What would a real flood be like, he wondered, or a windstorm? For a minute in his eyes almost closed under the impact of sheer emotional excitement. He'd seen microfilms of ancient natural disasters in which the power of nature was unleashed, and now he imagined great brown curls of flood water emerging from real rivers, torrents of rain that fell with great force, winds that whipped a world apart. Yet Earth had survived. It was still down there, and down there great climactic changes still existed. Heat and cold as they were, despite their convenience or inconvenience to man, to be pitted against that. Proteus held his breath, almost woozy with the thought of it, to exist in the context of nature. What excitement it must have generated. Just a real rainstorm coming from nowhere, appearing out of itself, out of nature, sinking down into the real ground filled with dirt and bugs and roots. His eyes stung. The polite rain was done. It was all a sham. The plastic trees didn't need nourishment. They didn't grow. Psychologists thought that the Earth-type environment helped man feel secure. Proteus knew this, but now started but now he stared angrily at the meticulous street and went back inside. Matthias was waiting for him. There's no way that you could set up natural life conditions inside a subity sun? There's no way you could set up a natural life conditions in a subity sun, he said. You know that. Don't torment yourself. You'd have to go to Earth. Well, people do go there, Proteus said. His face flushed. He lowered his eyes. But they don't live there. A few do. Microfilms mention them. Historians go down. Scientists. They have to make repairs on their equipment sometime. So what, his father said. There's no future on Earth. The whole place is drained dry, useless, stripped of anything worthwhile. It's just a husk. He paused and said more gently, and Proteus, you are a boy, not a girl. It's true that your opportunities aren't as extensive as they might be, but there are plenty of places for you to fit in here. Even if there were opportunities on Earth, and there aren't, then they'd go to women. Proteus looked out at the window. The sidewalk was already dry. The suction equipment had absorbed all the water so that none was wasted. He turned so that his father couldn't see his face. Everything's the same, all the time, he said dully. Don't you ever think about how fantastic it must have been, just people with all the colors of skin? That alone. Now we're all homogenized. At this, Matthias laughed. What's wrong with everyone having olive skin, he asked. You're just arguing for the sake of it now. There's all kinds of variations if you want to look for them. From yellow olive to brown olive to olive, Proteus said. You just don't understand it all. Centuries ago there were black men and white men and yellow men, and they all fought with each other, Matthias said wearily. Now there's one less thing to fight about. The races merged. What's so wrong about that? Will you stop trying to pick an argument with me and find something constructive to do? Proteus nodded, but he realized suddenly that he was finished arguing. His father wanted him to do something constructive, and he would. Somehow he'd get to Earth. Somehow he'd recreate the ancient farm there. Instead of dreaming about being frustrated, he'd act. Someday he'd stand on real ground, while real rain fell, and then this would seem like the dream. You're going to have trouble with that one, Cypress said to Oversoul 7. They were conversing in the further reaches of the room's plastic dome. Well, he's not one of my favorites, 7 said. He's so gloomy half the time. Cypress waited, then she said, There's a connection that you seem to have missed. Shall I point it out to you? No, give me another chance, 7 said. I don't need any more demerits, not even one. He reviewed the entire scene, including the thoughts he'd received telepathically from Proteus. Then he blushed. Of course, the farm. Proteus wants to set up a farm on Earth. It's just possible that he had a dream last night about a farm or a picture of one. Exactly, Cypress said. Well, Proteus has had that idea for some time, 7 said. But if he did participate in Yosef's dream, he'd use it in his own way, of course. You know, in a way, he acts older than Lydia. He broods so. Cypress smiled. Do you know why? No. I'm sure you'll discover the reason for yourself. It's not up to me to tell you. But now suppose we look in on your Ma'a. Oversoul 7 was delighted to change the subject. The wolf cubs spread across the cliffs in the moonlight. Okay, now we're at 35,000 BC. The wolf cubs spread across the cliffs in the moonlight. Ma'a crouched in the shadows, waiting. She was hungry. but then she usually was, her belly pushed in almost to her backbone. She ran across the cliffs when the wolf cubs vanished, and scurried to the clearing where they'd been forced to leave the kill they'd found. She'd frightened the cubs off by throwing rocks. Rampa came over from the other side of the cliff. He used a bow and arrows. The two of them found little, only a dead hare, but they ate it at once, ravenously. The hides they wore protected them somewhat against the wind, and they crouched unspeaking, while the ice cracked along the cliffs almost in sequence, and the air rushed in and out of the rock crevices. Cypress said to Oversoul 7, "I didn't know you were that adventurous." Oversoul 7 shrugged, with just a hint of smugness. Then he said Proteus should experience this. If he wants to know what real Earth is like, he'd probably plead for some artificial pretty rain that stops on time. Cypress smiled but said nothing. Ma'a and Rampa finished eating. They ran down into a nearby cave, pulling in out of the cold, satisfied. The damp smell of the hides rose to their nostrils. Their bellies felt warm from the food. A sense of peace descended upon them. They fell asleep. Their satisfaction was transmitted to Cypress and Seven, who also felt the cold wind that rushed past the cave entrance. "I could make the wind die down just a bit, couldn't I?" Seven asked. Cypress nodded. Oh, Seven said. The change in the wind had altered Ma'a, even in her sleep. In a moment her spirit body came out of the cave. She saw them. "Oh, it's you, old man," she said. "She's very good," Seven said to Cypress, "but she always sees me as an old man." "Why not?" "You always are an old man when I see you," Ma'a said. "Are you going to help me keep watch tonight?" "Not tonight," he said, adding to Cypress. I'll help her watch sometimes when she's tired, so the wolves don't find the cave." "You know that you're out of your physical body?" Cypress asked. "Of course," Ma'a said scornfully. "If I didn't go out in the spirit at night, who'd watch over my body while I sleep? Only I don't like to get too far away from my body. Rampa hardly ever comes awake when he's asleep." "Whose spirit are you?" "I'll tell you sometime," Cypress said. Then she and Seven disappeared. "Ma'a always sees me as an old man," Seven sighed. "Come to think of it, she sees me as black because she's black. Joseph sees me in lots of different ways, but he likes to see me as an old man too. It gives him confidence in me for some silly reason, but Proteus never sees me at all." "So?" Cypress asked. "So," Cypress said. "Well, none of them see me as I am, male and female, ageless, beyond any image. Even Lydia, she doesn't let herself believe in her soul at all, at least not on an intellectual level." "Now who's brooding?" Cypress said. "You sound as downhearted as Proteus." "Proteus? He'll probably never see me if he keeps on the way he's going," Seven said. "But you've already met Joseph, so I presume that this part of the examination is over. I'd like to see him when he's awake in his time, if you don't mind," Cypress said dryly. Now we jump to the year 1615. Just as Oversoul 7 and Cypress arrived at Joseph's, there was a tremendous pounding at his door. Joseph Lansdatter moaned, bounded out of bed, ran his fingers through his bushy hair, and almost sobbed. He'd never felt so cornered in his life. "Coming. Yes, yes," he shouted. He hoped that he sounded enraged, impatient, anything but scared. He grabbed a paintbrush, dipped it into a jar of varnish, held it between his teeth, and threw open the door. I'm working, can't you see? I'm busy, but come in if you must. El- Eldrin Holsentop reminded himself that his wife watching from the first floor landing, so he strode through the door briskly. It was, after all, his house, his extra room. The place was a mess of rumpled clothing, tossed bedding, paint jars, and canvases in various stages of completion. Ah, where were you sleeping or painting? My wife swears that you were still in bed. What does it look like? Do you think I sleep with my paintbrush in my mouth? Yosef pushed the brush towards Hosenstaff's nose so that the smell of the fresh varnish made the older man's eyes water and his nose run. You distrust me, Yosef said. Now that he had the advantage, you've always distrusted me. How can I work under such conditions? Hosenstaff stepped back. All right, but my wife tells me that you eat more than 10 farm hands put together, and I won't be taken advantage of. We've yet to see a glimmer of our painting. You've been here 6 weeks now, eating our good food, using our nice room. The painter, my cousin, did his portrait in 2 weeks and was gone. And the painting probably won't last much longer than that, Yosef retorted, getting into it. A good artist needs time. He pointed dramatically to the draped easel. Your portrait is covered. I've told you. It makes me nervous to show a painting before it's done, and it took me a good 2 weeks to get it started as it is. Your wife puts me in such a mood that I couldn't think, much less paint. Shush, Holzenstaff's light blue eyes lowered. Some of the belligerence drained from his face. He'd been shaking his finger at Yosef. Now he fussed with his shirt instead, and looked almost pleadingly up in Yosef's stormy face. My wife is impatient to see the painting. Women, they cannot wait. Ah, don't I know it, Yosef said, as if they shared a dark, mysterious secret. But very soon now I'll unveil the portrait. He threw his arms out dramatically, smiled grandly. You'll see your family immortalized through the ages, the Holzenstaff family. The portrait will go down through the generations, from father to son. He's a lazy clout, and you should put him out in the snow like the cur he is, yelled Ivana Hosenstaff from the stairs. Flinching, her husband closed the door. Ah, very well, Yosef shouted. I'll burn my painting rather than give it to the likes of that one. None of you deserve fine art. You're worse than the shopkeepers. He rummaged through the room, picking up his belongings. Then he stopped in front of the covered easel. You will never be completed. Never, he moaned. Some silly woman prevents it. Ah, well, if they resent the few morsels of food I eat, the use of this tiny room in exchange for a masterpiece. Hosenstaff was an unimaginative man, at least generally speaking. It didn't occur to him at this point that anyone could fake such anguish. Now, he said hurriedly, I'll take things over with my wife. I'll see what she says. He backed out of the room and closed the door. Cypress and Overall Soul 7 were now 2 flakes of snow in the windowsill. Embarrassed, 7 said. Yosef's very excitable. Just then, Yosef threw the cover off the easel, displaying not a half-completed painting at all, but the empty canvas beneath. And quite deceitful, Cypress said. No, I'm quite sure he doesn't mean to be 7 answered uneasily, because obviously it wasn't going to be one of Yosef's better days. Yosef stared at the canvas hatefully. Blank, all blank, he muttered. Bah! Completely disgusted, he planked down on the bed. Holstenstaff wouldn't be back, he knew, but his wife would, with her eldest son. They'd boot him out. There'd be no more hedging or excuses. He'd be back on the plains. He'd be back on the plains on his skis, with his supplies on his back, cold and hungry until he could find another farmer willing to give him bed and board for a painting. And worst, he couldn't make himself paint anything at all. This time his torment was quite real. He threw the sticky varnish-covered brush across the room and wondered what to do. Your dream, Oversoul 7 said. Cypress, can't I remind him? The painting I gave him in the dream. He's forgotten all about it. No, you cannot, she said. No prompting in this part of the examination. You know that. 25 demerits in case you have any ideas. Examination or not, I mean he is in trouble, 7 said. Oh, somebody help me, Yosef moaned. How many demerits, 7 asked. 25. And you have several already, she reminded him. And you still won't tell me what happens if I fail or pass? She said gently. That's part of the examination, too. You have to find that out. Oh, dear God. I'll never lie or cheat again if you just help me now, Yosef prayed. Your dream, 7 transmitted the words directly into Yosef's mind. The painting in the dream. The instant transformation in Yosef was extraordinary. Suddenly he shouted, leapt from the bed, threw his arms around himself, and danced about the room. Oversoul 7 almost burst with excitement himself. Cypress made a determined effort not to show any expression at all, and to guard her thoughts. Get to it, 7 signaled Yosef. Now standing before the easel, Yosef grinned from ear to ear, in his mind's eye, as clearly as he'd ever seen anything in his life. He saw an oil painting of the Holstenstaff farm in the summer, the fields rich, the sturdy house surrounded by tulips. The greens glowed with vitality. It was the middle of the season, with only sneaky touches of brown hinting at the overripeness that he would be in its... Oh man, I gotta start this over. The greens glowed with vitality. It was in the middle of the season, with only sneaky touches of brown hinting at the overripeness that would be its own undoing. Even the grays beneath the yellows and the whiteness of the house suggested that the farmhouse, while secure, would not triumph over time. Yet somehow the overall effect was still one of vitality, as if the entire scene would endure while it was so physically vulnerable. He'd never seen a painting so clearly in his mind before. The canvas was coated, all ready to work, and as the thoughts went flying through his mind, Yosef's hands were busy mixing the colors for his palette, combining the dry pigments with linseed oil. He felt swift, sure, godlike with his sudden unexpected rush of inspiration. Singing, almost shouting, he began to paint. Partaking of Yosef's experience, Oversoul 7 forgot everything else. Once, when Yosef picked the wrong color, 7 called, No, no, you'll spoil it. You want earth tones there. Another time he cried, No, you dunce. This is only the underpainting. Cypress waited, never interfering. Only once she spoke. This part of the examination is only supposed to involve a brief viewing, she said, making her tone as neutral as possible. Yes, yes, I'll be with you shortly, 7 muttered. Then, no, transparent color there. No, not opaque, he called to Yosef. 5 hours of Earth time passed. There was a knock at the door. Go away, I'm working, Joseph shouted. The door flew open. Miss Holzenstaff and her eldest son, Jonathan, came pounding into the room. Ah, now maybe we'll get a look at the painting that isn't there. I want to see underneath that cover. I don't believe a word you say, Miss Holzenstaff shouted. Then she and her son both stopped speechless. Now you see. Go, go, leave me alone, Joseph muttered. Nothing mattered but the painting. It's of my lovely house, Miss Holzenstaff said. It's beautiful. An inspiration, Jonathan said. Man to man, let me apologize. Apologize then and let me work. Can't you see I'm busy? I'm not finished. I've barely begun. And you've started the portrait too? Jonathan asked hastily. Yes, 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 Joseph cried automatically. Liar, Seven shouted to Joseph's mind. You promised not to lie or cheat again. A sudden pang of guilt made Joseph angry. He wanted to get on with his painting. You'll have your portrait in good time, he said. Can't a man have peace to work? Miss Holzenstaff and her son moved toward the door, almost deferently. Joseph called after them triumphantly. The house was meant as a bonus to repay you for your great kindness. Oh, Joseph, Seven sighed. Cypress said, You realize what you've done, of course, become so involved in Joseph's difficulties that you've forgotten everything, even the examination. Seven came back to himself with dismay. But I have to wait till he finishes the underpainting, now that I've started, he said. Then Joseph can do the rest himself well enough. Till I speak I'll speak to you when you're finished then, Cypress said. For a moment, Seven wondered why he couldn't pick up more of Cypress's thoughts, but already she was gone. Seven stayed there while Joseph continued to paint, his brush like a perfect extension of the picture in his mind. And that's it for chapter 2.